think they will start recording. Okay. So just a quick introduction of the day and what we are expecting from you today. So we are aiming to gain insights from our keynote speakers. They will bring their own background and experience in the transition challenges, the policy landscape and visions, of course, in the chemical sector. And then we will explore policy options that we have identified during our activities in the Sustrack project. And we will also need your input to collaboratively identify the strengths and weaknesses of the policy options that we identified, but also the opinions that additional policy options from your side. And the expected outcomes are acquiring actionable knowledge base for choosing between different policy options, of course, to boost the transition in the chemical sector and to gain in-depth knowledge of strengths and weaknesses of these policy options to pave the way for prioritizing future policy pathways. And of course, their implications for governance, industry, research, and society. So here is the overview of the conference objectives, and then we will leave the floor for the keynote speakers that I will introduce later on as their turn to present. Then we will open the floor for a quick Q&A session for the keynote speakers. We will introduce our policy fact sheets and the methodology to reach to that point to identify which policy options would be more relevant in our case. And again, there will be a quick Q&A session in order to clarify if you have any questions in mind. And then we will have the discussion for the interactive session. We aim to discuss strengths and weaknesses of the proposed policy options. And if you see something missing or additional, you will have the opportunity to suggest alternative policies, and then we will share insights on implementing the policies and subsequent effects on the sector. And we will close the meeting with the final remarks. For the ones who are attending the first time to our Sustrack activities, a very quick presentation also from my side. This is again Gülşah Yılan from Unitalma Sapienza University of Rome. We are the coordinator of the Sustrack project that reads as supporting the identification of policy priorities and recommendations for designing a sustainable track towards circular bio-based systems. So this is a coordination and support action. And we started running late 2022. This is our last year. And a very quick look at the abstract. Of course, we are all working on the similar topics of the transition from a conventional linear fossil-based system to circular bio-based ones in order to identify the opportunities to reconcile sustainable long-term growth with environmental protection. But this transition doesn't mean that it is going to be beneficial in any case, so that we have to understand, we have to critically assess the impacts in each sphere, environmental, social, and economic, but as well as the improvement in the transition to circular systems. And we are mainly focusing on supporting the policymakers to develop sustainable pathways to replace fossil carbon-intensive systems with more sustainable circular and bio-based ones, and at the same time achieving the European Green Deal's objectives. And again, if this is your first time hearing about our project, I would like to encourage you to visit our website. We are using very actively in order to communicate our activities, our results, as well as the social media channels on Twitter, X, or LinkedIn. And the main objectives we are following in this project are two. We are aiming to provide knowledge and tools for monitoring and assessing the impacts of linear and circular bio-based economy. And the final objective is to identify priorities and define actions to support policymakers. In order to reach these main objectives, we also have 5 specific objectives. We started with the identification, assessment, and prioritization of the environmental, economic, and social limits of linear carbon-intensive and fossil-based economy. We also publish these reports online on our website, and we aim to develop knowledge and tools for monitoring and assessing the impacts. This is a work still ongoing, so by the end of the project, we want to deliver this online tool in order to understand how the transition impacts in different sectors. And we are also aiming to assess the environmental, social, and economic impacts of the sustainable transition, adopting a case study approach. So this is the chemicals workshop. We also have plastics, textiles, and the construction sector workshops. We are creating, simulating, and interpreting a variety of scenarios using system dynamic modeling. This is also about to be finalized. And finally, we aim to identify policy priorities, define corresponding policy actions, and provide recommendations. So further, we are now moving to keynote speakers. I will stop my presentation here, and I will leave the floor to Ivana. At the same time, maybe Valentina can share the screen.
Yes.
Okay. So a very quick introduction for Ivana. Dr. Ivana Kirklius is working at BASF, Corporate Strategy for Green Transformation. She is a long-term sustainability professional. She has experience in customer engagement and presenting at large public settings. She has created with her team an entirely new market application for closed-the-loop product concept. I hope to hear more about it during her presentation. And she also has an academic background in physical chemistry. She has certificates in business sustainability management, political economy. So she has both hands on both academia and the industry. And she's going to deliver the presentation titled "The Transformative Power of Renewable Carbon and Its Role in Reducing Greenhouse Gas Emissions." Ivana, I leave it to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, also from my side. Thank you for joining the call. I hope it will be also useful for you. I'm looking forward to your engagement and questions. We can progress to the presentation. I would suggest my main focus for today's short pitch will be talking about the renewable carbon. If you can maybe move to the first presentation slide, that would be the next one. So basically, what was also said in the introduction, the European Green Deal is the European long-term growth strategy to make Europe climate neutral until 2050. And on the next slide, you will see also that BASF is part of this commitment as well. We are fully committed to climate neutrality goal. We also have our intermediate targets, 2030, 25% reduction in scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And in this short preview, I would also like to give you just the first impulse on one of the pillars where we are investing and making further commitments toward achieving this goal. On the next slide, you will see that already today we provide thousands of products with reduced and low product carbon footprints to our customers. These levers are actually supported by, on one hand, further operational emission reduction measures, but then also utilization of renewable energy and also switch to circular feedstocks. And that is also a very important pillar. In 2023, BASF has already purchased roughly 1 million metric tons of renewable raw materials based on vegetable oils, based on fats, grains, sugar, and wood. And these are used to produce the ingredients for cosmetic industry, for pharmaceutical industry, for example, but also BASF offers compostable bioplastics and organic waste collection, which is used for agricultural application. On the next slide, you will see why actually this is important and why we commit so much to utilization of renewable carbon. On one hand, the energy sector can be decarbonized by switching to renewable energy sources, but chemical industry cannot, because we depend on utilization of carbon. And our commitment is then going forward to increase the share of renewable carbon and substitute the fossil carbon. What seems as a limitation, dependence on carbon itself, at first is actually what we see as an opportunity for us, because this gives us the biggest lever and the biggest possibility to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And our zero PCF products can be achieved primarily by utilization of the biogenic carbon. This is why BASF have made also further commitments, and you will be able to see a couple of details about that on the following slide. Maybe you had a chance previously to get informed about our investment in renewable energy. This is something that has been running already for a couple of years, and we have been very successful also with this model. And basically now we try to replicate the same business model and the same approach, which is why our CEO has announced at the last quarter of 2024 the establishment of BASF Renewable Carbon Unit in global procurement, where we will secure the increasing volumes of renewable feedstock. This is our commitment actually for the following years to introduce another lever where we can even increase further the volumes of renewable carbon and offer further solutions to our customers. Our idea is the following. On one hand, to enlarge the scope of bio-based products for those customers who are seeking actually the biogenic carbon content in their products. And basically where you can trace down through the final product also C14 carbon through dedicated production routes. We are also at the same time the first company to offer certified personal care ingredients based on coconut oil. On the other hand, we also plan, it is fine, you can progress further, we plan to introduce and increase the amount of bio-attributed products. At the moment, we offer more than 1,500 certified products from 40 certified locations in North America, in Asia, and in Europe. This is also the offering that is very, very appealing to our customers, especially to those who have committed to the greenhouse gas emission reductions. And we have also across our portfolio many examples of customers who purchase bio-attributed products from BASF. On the following slide, I wanted to briefly touch upon one of the points actually that you are aiming for in this discussion. And that is, what are the framing conditions that are needed also for chemical sector in order to even be more successful, in order to not only to reach climate targets, but also to make offerings that are appealing to our customers. Because we have to be aware that we are also operating in a very unsecure environment. We are making further commitments, also further investments, investing in projects with very uncertain conditions, uncertain regulatory conditions. And our customers and consumers also, they make informed purchasing decisions. But products, aside from being affordable, also need to be sustainable. But first and foremost, they have to deliver the performance. And on one hand, we also are sure that mandatory targets will be also the main driver for products, for procurement of more sustainable products, but we also need a good set of framework conditions that we would follow and comply with, but they also need to be there, put it in place and present in order to make framework conditions for us. And I want to also finally end up also with an optimistic statement, because we want to make the good products better. We want to improve policies and practices. We want to support also balance of action with a balance of thought, and have a good offering for our customers and for a larger group of stakeholders in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. So I will move to the next speaker, Richard Campen. I think you prefer sharing your own screen, no? And
yes, let me try.
Meantime, I'm going to have a quick introduction. So Richard has a background in business and economics. And after 5 years of working at Unilever in sales and marketing, he decides to move to work for the government due to a lack of sustainability focus in his role. And he has been working in the circular economy domain, working on national plastic legislation, as well as the transition of chemical industry towards sustainable carbon. And he is the policy officer, circular economy and climate section in the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. He is going to deliver his presentation titled Drafting Policy to Transition the Chemical Industry to Sustainable Carbon. And this is his quote. So I just wanted to mention, move to the government, because he figured, don't hate the player, hate the game. Maybe he can explain better. And I kindly ask you to stay in 5 minutes so that we can respect the schedule of the day. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that kind introduction. As you can tell, I don't have a background in science myself, so I'm very happy with workshops like these where you academics can tell us, me and my colleagues, about the best policies to make. So thank you, and also thank you for the presentation from BASF, really inspiring to see what companies are doing. So let me try and keep this short in the 5 minutes. Like you said, don't hate the player, hate the game. Working in FMCG, I really thought that what is needed is legislation to really push this market forward, because by itself, it's not happening. So that's why I took on a challenge in the circular economy role I am now. And in this role, I worked on the chemical industry. And I'm going to tell you a bit about the challenges which we hit. So spoiler alert, there are many. First of all, we took a look at the current policy landscape, and we noticed that there's a big focus in public debate on fossil fuels, but there's a limited focus on feedstocks. And while 20% of the refinery production is used by the chemical industry to make products that everyone uses every day, there's barely any policy focused on making the feedstock sustainable. ETS does include the chemical industry, but it's mostly focused on Scope 1 emissions. And also bio-based policy mostly is directed to biofuels instead of the chemical sector. So therefore, there's a wide spot in policy for defossilizing the non-energetic use of carbon. And therefore, me and my colleagues from the Ministry of Climate and Green Growth embarked on 2 tracks, a national track and an international track to start scoping the challenge of making this policy. So first of all, in a national track, we started a huge project with a lot of stakeholder interactions and also a lot of research to assess the size of this challenge to transition the chemical industry to sustainable carbon use. And first of all, we needed a definition, of course. So in our definition, sustainable carbon is all carbon that avoids or replaces additional fossil carbon from the geosphere. So that means secondary resources, bio-based resources, and also CO2. And we identified 3 main routes to move the industry to sustainable carbon use. It's a lot of details to go into, and these are just the preliminary conclusions. So you can read more about it in the research we will publish later this year. But really short, the 3 routes are sustainable bulk chemistry, where we use new feedstocks in existing routes and assets to create existing products. The gasification route, where we use new feedstocks in new routes and assets to create existing products, and also the new biochemistry, where we would create new feedstocks with new routes and assets to create also new products. But a really important other conclusion in this research was that the chemical industry is an international industry, and therefore solutions need to be international as well. And the main challenges that we identified are actually step 1 in all policy is agreeing on what needs to happen. And there, the entire industry was really aligned. First of all, they said we need to stimulate EU internal demand, because if there's no demand for sustainable products, then we won't get lift off anyhow. Secondly, a big factor is harmonizing the EU legislation. And I already saw it mentioned on the BASF slides by Ivana. Carbon accounting and mass balance are really important ones to get done before this can really take off. Also, commoditizing residual waste streams and secondary resources is a really important factor so that companies will be able to trade cross borders and avoid difficult legislation regarding end of life of products. Also, we would need investment in research and innovation. And besides these really important topics, there are a few preconditions that are also quite difficult to solve for this transition. Because first of all, moving from the fossil carbon, which also has the energetic carbon in it, towards the sustainable carbon that lacks the energetic side, we will need a sufficient supply of affordable and durable energy. So we need a lot more wind and solar in order to make this transition. Also, of course, the supply of circular carbon, the resources I mentioned, by improving the capacity for recycling and also thinking about our agricultural capacity. Lastly, this transition will also take up a lot more space. Currently, the system is so optimized, efficient, that if we're going to move to this new system, it's going to be a lot more complex and also require a lot more space, both physically as well as environmentally. For example, talking about nitrogen problem. And lastly, but second, definitely not least, is we need a positive, competitive circular business case for the companies. Because if there's no business case, then there won't be any investments made in this transition and companies will invest elsewhere. So after agreeing on what is needed, next up is finding agreement on how to do it. And this will be an even bigger challenge because how do you create a market demand? Are we going to use the carrot or the stick? How do we ensure competitiveness? Do we need to isolate Europe? Do we need to extend CBAM to chemistry? How will we be able to make the products that will be more expensive because they're sustainable still competitive in the international market? And also, how do we ensure the alignment of phase out of old industry and phase in of the new? Because as you all know, the current context is quite heavy for the industry and we are losing our industry at the moment. And what is a big risk is that before we can build the new one on top of the current industry, that it will be gone already. So it's really important to make sure that the alignment of the phase out and phase in is done correctly. Also, we need to decide where to invest. What are the best places to put our money? And how do we reconcile the industry interests with those of citizens? As I said, it will take up a lot more space, and European citizens are generally not a fan of waste recycling facilities next to their house. After identifying this national track, we also really realized that we are not going to be able to do this as a Dutch government by ourselves. So we really need to push for European legislation. That's why already over a year ago, we handed a joint statement to Wopke Hoekstra to push for a European sustainable carbon policy package. And with the new commission just releasing the Clean Industrial Deal, we see a first promising green signs. We see mentions of decarbonization and mandates for the new use of raw material sources like recycled and bio-based materials. So the first green lights are showing, but in conclusion, the industry is in heavy weather and policy is just starting to catch up. So there's still a big challenge ahead. I hope that was 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Richard, for your insights. And I see many overlapping parts for also our upcoming discussion. So I'm looking forward to it. But before, we still have Marco Pellegrini for his presentation. So do you prefer sharing your own screen, Marco?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, in the meantime, I will give a quick introduction. Marco Pellegrini is a chemical engineer and is currently the bioeconomy manager at Cefic, where he focuses on boosting the European chemical industry's contribution to the bioeconomy. Before joining Cefic, he worked for 10 years in the industry across the chemical, bio-based, and pharma sectors, and mostly on the development of processing involving the production of chemicals with genetically modified bacteria, cultured meat, and vaccines. And his presentation today is entitled as Challenges and Opportunities for the Biomass-Derived Chemical Sector, a Look Ahead. So over to you, Marco.
Thank you. Do you see the screen first of all?
We do.
Okay, very good. So good morning, everybody. And as just said, so in the next few minutes, I'm gonna work together with you in looking at challenges and opportunities for the biomass-derived chemical sector. And we're gonna try also to look a little bit in the crystal ball to see what can be the path ahead of us. So to start with, maybe it's good to have a look at how do we make a biomass-derived chemical. Of course, we start from the feedstock, which is biomass, as the name suggests, which can be agricultural residues, forestry residues, crops, waste streams, etc. Of course, it's important to recognize that the same biomass can be used for a lot of different uses. So it's not specific to chemicals, but it can go to a lot of different uses. Once we have secured the biomass, we need to actually transform it, convert it, and use it in the manufacturing process. And to this end, we actually need some type of conversion technology, which can be, again, a list of them, for example, thermochemical, enzymatic, etc. And then once we have gone through our manufacturing, we can finally yield a product. You may have noticed the word biomass-derived chemical, which perhaps is not something you are familiar with. And that's a term that we use as an umbrella to actually include bio-based, segregated value chains and bioattributed products, which are produced via, let's say, a more mixed type of value chain, in which you mix biomass with other type of sources. And this is important to highlight that both have a place for the transition. It's important also to realize that each of these steps carries its own challenges. So if we look at feedstock, so there is the problem, for example, of biomass availability. Is it sustainable? Is there enough? On the manufacturing side, the technology needs often to be scaled up. It's a capital-intensive process, the scaling up. Often this technology is still at a relatively low TRL, technology readiness level. So that's there are a lot of challenges in the manufacturing part. And also from a product perspective, these products need to be, let's say, helped to actually survive on the market, since they are still, let's say, in their infancy, and they have to compete with the conventional established products. Of course, feedstock aspect, we say, is the first step in the value chain. But if we try to look ahead, and we asked that ourselves here at Cefic, and we developed a model to actually look ahead to understand what could be the feedstock mix in the future. To do so, just to give you a very brief background, so we explore different pathways to net zero in 2050, modeling 18 chemicals, accounting for the majority of emission in detail, and then aggregating the others in an aggregated group, and trying to minimize the net present cost of chemical production. What did we see as a result? So here you see in brownish fossil feedstock represented in the plot, while in green there is the bio-based feedstock. X-axis years, Y-axis million tons of feedstock, and different colors represent different feedstocks. So we can see actually that from 2019, in which we were using approximately 9 million tons of bio-based feedstock, we move towards 2050 to reach net zero, in which this use reaches approximately 40% of the total of the feedstock to 60 million tons roughly. So it is clear that biomass use needs to increase to reach net zero in 2050. And this is indeed one of the challenging aspects. So we say there are a lot of challenges that we have to overcome. How can we promote biomass-derived chemicals? Looking again from a value chain perspective, so if we look at the feedstock side, so we need to have universal, clear sustainability criteria that are applicable everywhere for biomass sourcing, regardless of what is the final use. It's also important to recognize the role of biomass imports, so for example, via free trade agreements, because it's very unlikely that we will be able to source the total amount of bio-based feedstock we need in Europe. And of course, we said biomass can be used for a lot of different uses, so we need to be able to have a cascading use principle that provide the highest efficiency of biomass use that can be provided. When we look at manufacturing side, so we need also supply side measures to support competitive manufacturing on the energy side, for example, And of course, we need to focus also on the deployment to high technology readiness level and industrial scale, and help the de-risking of the scale-up if we want to see these technologies to succeed. And finally, on the product side, we need to have market pull incentive, as they are called, which can be, for example, public procurement for green products or others, because we need to help, let's say, this product to reach the market. Which are actually the policy opportunities that can help us to actually implement those solutions? Well, we have mainly three: bioeconomy strategy update, which should be coming this year. There is probably for next year, Biotech and Biomanufacturing Act, that are actually very helpful and that could provide the tools or some of the tools to help in the transition. And also the common agricultural policy is, of course, important, among others, because that's agriculture, forestry is from where we take in biomass in the majority of cases. So we need actually a supportive regulatory framework which needs to be clear. It needs to contain implementable actions. And since bioeconomy, and especially also for chemicals, we talk about a sector that crosses along different fields. So we need to have consistency and coherence across legislative initiatives. And finally, as it was also remarked by the other speakers, so we need action taken now, because we cannot wait to lose the industry to implement the transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. And thank you all for the invited speakers. Ivana made a very valid point in the chat. And in the meantime, as my colleague is preparing himself to share the screen, I just want to underline that we didn't see the presentations of our keynote speakers, but they are all in line. So you will also see that from our side, our analysis is highlighting almost the same issues. So which means that we are very well aware of the problem. However, we still need this effort in order to reach the solution. So these activities of workshops and stakeholder engagement activities, as we call them, is our brick in the wall in order to build it together and to make this transition maybe happening in a faster way. So let's hear our perspective now. I'm leaving it to Harry. He is sharing his screen. Okay, please, Harry.
Sorry, Gulsa and Harry, just a quick comment. If you have any questions for our keynote speakers, please feel free to write them in the chat, and also keynote speakers can respond in the chat, and we will have some time also during the interactive session if there are specific questions. So please feel free to do it. Harry, sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, no problem. So hello also from my side. I hope you can hear me and see the slides.
Yes, not in presentation mode, however.
Okay, I have it in presentation mode, then let me change it again. Does it work now?
Yes, it does.
Perfect.
Yes.
So as already said, the key idea of the workshop is to collect strengths and weaknesses of certain policy approaches for the transition to the circular bio-based economy. So the workshop is not so much about selecting certain policies and choosing or stating preferences for one or the other, but it's really about the strengths and weaknesses, and we want to collect this information to inform the policymakers to what they can expect if we apply certain policies in case they're implemented. And we also have a survey coming up where you will also have the chance to actually state which kind of the policies you prefer. So first for the method, so how did we come up with the policies? We started with a literature review that was AI assisted, in total 130 sources, also for the other sectors. We also had scientific articles on economics of sustainable resource use, and we included input we got from other stakeholders during our project. And what we were looking for is, on the one hand, what kind of policies are already existing for the chemical sector, what are policy gaps, which some have already been mentioned here in the pitches, and especially what kind of proposals are there in the literature and mentioned by the stakeholders to fill these policy gaps. So there are quite a lot of policies, and the question is, I mean, we cannot talk about all the policies out there and even additional policies for the future, so we have to make a selection. But how did we make the selection? So this is just a screenshot example of circular economy policies, and you see there are quite many. This is just the point I made, that it's just not possible to talk about everything. And the project is very much about finding priorities. So what are the key policies to boost the transition? So what did we do here? We made a kind of structure to define a certain policy set, which is indicated with the table here. The first thing we did is we took policies and selected them by the type. So there are different types of policy instruments, but two key types are first the direct regulation policy approach. And this is mostly if you use like quotas, for example, for using non-fossil feedstocks, or a ban of certain substances, or to use thresholds like emission thresholds. Another approach is a more market-based policy approach, and this would rely more on providing subsidies, taxes, or to use emissions trading. And in the practice, usually you combine many of these policies, and sometimes you have policies that are also in between. But to have a very clear structure here and to provide different or think about different alternatives, we try to sort the policies in mostly one or the other segment. A second choice we did when selecting a policy was to look for different functions that policy instruments can fulfill. So the first obvious function is that we need policies that promote the transition, that boost the use of biomass and circular practices and so on. But a second function we also need to have is to limit the resource use. So what do we mean by that, and why do we need it? You will be aware of policy documents like the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. And here it is stated very clearly that we need to decouple economic growth from resource use. And we have to keep our total consumption in the economy within the planetary boundaries, meaning that we also have to reduce the consumption footprint. So it's not only about changing the production, but also to limiting the consumption overall. And I have two examples here what this means. So first, you could say, well, if we recycle many products, that is already limiting the consumption, but this is not necessarily the case that we see here in one study that looked what happens in the entire economy if you increase recycling of products. And it can happen, as this study has shown, that the use of other resources increases at the same time. So you recycle more, but still you use more virgin resources at the same time. And this has been labeled a circular economy rebound, which basically an example is if you open up secondary markets, recycling markets, and so on, you enable consumers to sell their old products that have been before just gone to waste. And if you sell it, instead of sending it to waste, you have additional income, revenue. And with that, you can buy additional products, and it's not guaranteed that these will be recycled products. So you can increase the total consumption. What is probably more important for the chemical sector that we are talking about today is the question why we should limit the biomass use. I mean, we just heard we need more biomass in the chemical sector, and this is correct. But still, it might make sense to have a kind of overall limitation here. So why is that? We have an increasing amount of studies that show that if we increase the use of biomass in sectors like construction or textile, what you see here, but also in the chemicals, we of course do have greenhouse gas emission savings because you replace the fossil-based products, but at the same time, we also lose carbon in the land use sector. And these additional emissions from the land use sector might even be bigger than the greenhouse gas emission savings. So while we do need policies that do promote recycling and the use of biomass or bio-based products, we also need policies that limit or reduce consumption and that limit or reallocate the biomass within the entire economy. And this has also been mentioned in one of the pitches, that it might be reasonable to take biomass that is today in another sector, in the energy sector, for example, and reallocate it also to sectors like the chemical sector, so that the overall amount of biomass stays the same, but you use it more in places like the chemical industry where it produces higher value than in other sectors like the energy sector. A third choice we did is we saw also in the literature on chemicals that we have very much two different topics here. So we actually need two kind of policy sets. The one is about the circularity, and this is or was very much about everything connected to toxicity. So in other sectors, circularity is much about recycling a certain product, but in the chemical sector, it is much about that some chemicals might inhibit the recycling of other products that contain some chemicals. So this is the first fact sheet that we designed. And the second one is about using of biomass and replacing fossil feedstocks to reduce these greenhouse gas emission reductions. Okay, some disclaimer before we look at the actual policies. So what you will see is these are not yet any kind of recommendations from the project, but you can consider it more as a kind of options that we want to provide to policymakers to have a kind of toolkit that they can choose from. The second thing is that we had a focus here on, let's call it hard and binding policies, what has been mentioned in one pitch as carrots and sticks. So basically quotas, subsidies, taxes, and bans. So it's not so much about strategies or voluntary measures here. So we have a selection, and it is clear that additional measures will be necessary, but it's not possible to talk about all of them today. The third thing is that many details, as you will see, will still need to be specified. So we are mostly talking today about, let's call it archetypes. And in the second step, all the details will have to be spelled out, but there is no time to do this today. And fourth thing is that, as mentioned already, these instruments are not standalone instruments, but we have these policy sets of instruments that are connected to each other and reinforce each other. Okay, then let's have a look at the policy options. So first is, what are actually the challenges in the chemical sectors? Some we already heard, I make it quick. We know that we need chemicals in our modern industrial economies, but we have these two challenges, that we have toxicity risk from using some chemicals, and we have the need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gas emissions come from use of fossil feedstocks, which also implies a dependency on imports of on fossil resources. We also have a trade-off that practices like recycling of products that contain chemicals, they might help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but during recycling processes, it might also be that you accumulate toxic substances. So this is also a challenge. We already heard that we have a lack of policies that address the scope 2 and 3 greenhouse gas emissions in the sectors, because climate policies are mostly focusing on energy today. And we also have a lack of policies that address toxicity beyond the very small numbers of the so-called substances of very high concern. So let's look at the first policy set. So what kind of policies could we use to improve the circularity of products that contain chemicals. So I start in the lower row on the left, because this is what most or many chemicals today are addressing. And well, maybe I start with, the REACH regulation, which is much about which substances are or can have access to the market. And the idea here is similar to introduce thresholds for more key substances of concern and products that inhibit reuse or recycling. So this is very similar to some directives we already see in the European Union, like the restriction or regulation on hazardous substances, or the toys directive that contains thresholds for chemicals in toys, or the biocides directive. And the idea is to also use the thresholds not only to limit toxicity risks, but also to make it more easy to recycle products that contain chemicals. The second idea we found in the literature was to extend the permission criteria for chemicals in the REACH regulation, so that you do not only look for toxicity in the product while you use the product, but you also look at the toxicity at the end of life, so after using the product when you recycle it. And to say, maybe we do not permit certain chemicals if they make it impossible to recycle a product or to reuse it. And the third thing is that we found is an extension of the SCIP database, which is about, it's a database on products that contain very hazardous substances. And the idea is to also include chemicals that inhibit circularity. So that a company that buys wastes or secondary materials has information whether the secondary materials contains hazardous chemicals that inhibit the recycling or not. Then it's not enough to limit something, we also need this promotion function. And this basically could be a kind of support, like a subsidy for developing low risk chemicals and toxic free products according to the SSBD framework we have, which is voluntary for now, but it could be that governments or the EU provide funding for development of these low risk chemicals that abide these SSBD frameworks. So to give an additional incentive or a carrot here. So this was more of a direct regulation approach, even if, well, subsidy is actually both, but let's look at market-based instruments. You would also use the same subsidy here for developing new innovative products that are better for recycling, reusing products. But at the limiting the substance use function in the lower part of the table, you could, for example, think of a pollution tax on selected key substances of concern that we know are difficult if you want to recycle or reuse products. And examples in the literature have been lead, for example, or these so-called eternity chemicals or flame retardants. Okay, so this is everything being about the circularity and toxicity issue. And what we have also heard in the pitches, this is more about the greenhouse gas dimension and the biomass dimension. So this is in the second policy sheet. So let's start with the direct regulation. And you see we have three options here, because one of the option was a mixed policy approach that could also be interesting. So we added a third column here. So let's start on the left side. So how could we introduce more biomass into the chemical sector? And one idea is just very similar to the energy sector, that you use a kind of quota that the chemical sector has to use non-fossil feedstocks in the chemicals production, which could eventually lead to a total phase out of the fossil feedstocks, meaning or implying a ban in 2050. This is one option how you could do this. And to also have a carrot here, or to support these business models, this should be also complemented with a subsidy for innovative products that do exactly this phasing out or help to phase out the fossil chemicals. The limit resource use function is to have sustainability criteria. So it's not, it would not be possible to use just any kind of biomass to fulfill the quota or to get the subsidy, but you, just like in the energy sector today, you would have to comply with certain sustainability criteria that could be included in a kind of renewable material directive, which could be similar to the renewable energy directive that we have today with the sustainability criteria. A mixed policy approach could be to have a product subsidy on all or major non-fossil chemicals. An example we often find also in discussion with the stakeholders is this green VAT. So you reduce the value-added tax for these bio-based, for example, chemicals, but also for chemicals based on hydrogen, for example. And in addition to this, to support this also, this could also be complemented with the phase out leading to a ban again for fossil feedstocks in 2050, for example. Again, it could make sense not to have too much or non-sustainable biomass in the sector, to combine this with sustainability criteria, which I just mentioned before. So if you want to get the subsidy, then the biomass you use has to comply with certain sustainability criteria. And the third and last option is market-based instruments. So this would be that you use, again, innovation subsidy, but this time not for low toxic chemicals, but for innovative chemicals that use biomass or other non-fossil feedstocks, which is not only about like research and development, so creating pilot plants, but which also spans to introducing the products well into the market until they are established. So this would be included into this kind of subsidy. And for limiting the total resource use, it could be helpful to apply a carbon tax, what we currently have only in the energy sector, or there's an emission trading system, but you would apply a carbon tax on the use of fossil feedstocks in the chemical sector, but possibly also for low value biomass uses, or maybe for some biomass feedstocks that you say do not belong in the sector for one reason or the other. So this is basically the option that we found. And yeah, we're happy to discuss this in the next step with you in the Miro board.
Thank you very much, Harry. I hope you found interesting our approach. We are starting sharing the Miro board now for your contributions. If you have questions, both for the speakers and also for, of course, Harry and our team, feel free to speak up during the Miro board. We'll just wait for the technical explanation to use it. So I will share the Miro board link in the chat with all of you, so you can enter. So I copy the link in the chat. So I invite everyone to click on the link, and you should enter and see the screen that Luis is currently sharing. So I leave the floor very quickly to him for give a technical explanation on how to use it, how to zoom in, zoom out, and move around. And then I will quickly ask you what we are looking for in the discussion.
Yes, a very quick explanation on how to use the Miro. I think most of you already use it, but in order to zoom in and zoom out, if you have the mouse, you can use the mouse wheel, or you have a tool on the bottom right of the screen where you have the plus and minus, so you can zoom. And then you can use the right button to move the screen. And then on the right, you have some sticky notes that you can use to add your content, basically. So you can move it and double click, and you can write your text inside. I think this is about it, Valentina.
Yes, thank you, Luis. So if you have any problem in entering the Miro or if you have problem entering the Miro, just let us know, speak up. You can also write your contributions in the chat or speak, so we can add them to the Miro for you. So what we are asking now to you in respect to the policy options that Harry has shared. So you heard about our methodology to basically choose these policy options. We are asking to you to identify weaknesses to be written on the red post-its, or strengths to be written on the green ones. In regards to specific policy options, you will find that in the Miro board you have the two fact sheets that have been presented by Harry. So the one about circularity and the one about biomass GHG reduction on the right. So we simply ask you to take the post-its to indicate strengths and weaknesses about the different policy options presented and how they interact basically together, so how they have been presented. You also find some criteria in which you ask you to identify these weaknesses and strengths in terms of effective and administration costs, public budget, legal barriers, acceptance, or also other barriers. And if you have specific recommendations also, there are yellow post-its below weaknesses and strengths. So here you can indicate, for example, if a policy option you see a better fit to be coupled with other policies which are different from the ones presented by our experts. So this is basically the exercise. I don't know, Harry, if you want to add something here.
Yeah, just as you just mentioned, Valentina. So the question is really, maybe you do not have time to look and comment on all the instruments, but maybe you found some instrument very interesting, or you would say another instrument, this would never work in practice for these and these reasons. So this is exactly the information we would like to collect from you. So could these instruments that you see here pose a way forward to boost the transition in the chemical sector? And again, in the center, you see some kind of criteria. So would you think that using a subsidy, for example, or a quota, is this really effective for bringing us forward? Then the administration, so is it very, does it lead to much bureaucracy? Is it very difficult for the companies to apply this? Then the costs, would this be very expensive for the companies or for public budget, for example? Or do you know, let's say, legal barriers, are the legal barriers in your country, for example, or at the EU level that you are aware of that do not allow to use this instrument? And finally, acceptance, where you would say, is this an instrument that could lead to acceptance from the public, from the policy makers, but also, of course, from the companies? Or would this be very, or lead to high resistance? You can also add other thoughts or criteria, but this just to like give you an idea what we are looking for. And if you're very much inclined to focus on the right fact sheet, which is about the greenhouse gas emissions and biomass, please do so. And if you're also interested in all this toxicity, circularity topic, this you can find on the left side.
So thank you, Harry. I also kindly remind you to put near a specific policy option your comment, so you can move the post-its near the policy option you're referring to, so we know it. I know that some people wrote some questions in the chat, so maybe in the meantime, Gulsa, if we want to address the specific question.
Yes, but I want to leave the floor to Saskia. Do you prefer turning on your microphone and sharing your question? Let me see.
Sure. I think in the end, actually, Harry addressed a lot of my question. So my background is with respect to advancing safer chemistry. I used to work in the US. I've now moved to Europe. and I was working on just advancing safer chemistry in Washington State. And so a lot of times you're working with the chemical sector, but also then trying to do the pull through, with products. And so a lot of the efforts with respect to bio-based and biomass align with toxicity as demonstrated on this mirror board. So yeah, thank you for all your presentations. It was really helpful context.
Thanks for the contribution.
Thank you. So also in between, if you have any question in regard to a specific policy instrument that you find here, and maybe it was not really clear from my side what exactly is this instrument doing or what would it imply, you can always pose a question and we try to answer this.
I kindly recommend you to try to use the colors that we have put. So the orange, red, let's say, to mark the weaknesses, and the green, the strengths. And also, if you have recommendations in yellow, we are already changing real time, but we don't want to maybe do something that is not what you intended. So if please use those 3 color codes that will facilitate also the picking of the things that you might have highlighted.
So I see that there's already quite a lot of activity going on the Miro boards. I actually wanted to ask about the biomass GHG reduction sheet in the limit resource use direct regulation cell. One of the first contributions that was posted is when requiring high product quality standards that extend life use of products, this should reduce demand for new products. And this is added as a potential strength of sustainability criteria. So the person who added this posted, could you maybe explain a bit what you mean with this and why you see this as a strength?
Yes, that was me who posted that note. I know it's not really about the feedstock level, but if we put high requirements for extending the product life, then we can reduce the demand for new products. So not just a feedstock requirement on sustainability, but also on product level.
Okay, makes sense. That clarifies it. Thank you.
Sure.
Does anyone disagree with that, or are there very different opinions about that, or anyone wants to comment on this strength?
Quite honestly, I missed it because I was concentrated writing my comments. Can you repeat, please?
No problem. So basically, if we require our products to be of high quality, then they will be used for a longer time. We extend the life use of products. So we extend the period that you need to buy a new product and therefore hopefully reduce demand for the new products.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, so not only to look at the feedstock level, but throughout the entire value chain, also including the end user level and the product level.
I see, however, very little comments on our toxicity fact sheet. I don't know if apart from Saskia, we have other experts on the topic that would like to let us know about your view on strengths or weaknesses of the direct regulation or market-based instruments that we have suggested in this policy set.
Yes, this is a good point. Also, if you happen to have knowledge from certain countries, or maybe also from the US, for example, that some instruments have worked quite well and others not. This would be also really helpful to find it here.
And also, if you cannot, for any reason, enter the Miro board, or you can either use the chat here in Zoom, or raise your question by speaking, or tell us your contribution by speaking.
So I see some comments going back to the biomass fact sheets from the industry, basically commenting as a weakness that subsidy is not really sustainable. I'm curious to know if you can suggest some alternatives here. Do you have in mind some other policy options that can be more viable in your opinion? I don't know who wrote subsidies are not sustainable for industries. If you can elaborate a bit on this, if you have other ideas. It's important for us to have also the vision of the different, stakeholders. So also the point of view of industry on this.
Well, maybe I can add some thoughts to this. I mean, I didn't wrote the comment, but we were also thinking about this. Is it a sustainable pathway to promote the transition with subsidies? And as I mentioned before, with the case studies, you see that if you only use subsidies, you can exactly run into the sustainability issues because you're using too much biomass, for example. But this is why we have these policy fact sheets that always also include some policies that try to balance the effect of a subsidy. So, for example, sustainability criteria that limits the use of biomass, or even a carbon price for, let's say, certain low value bio-based products. But this is something we try to address with these multiple policies and the fact sheets that should be combined.
Yes, I think that's the point. I think it's not good to compete just with subsidies. You are against other industry that are using less fossil carbon, but if they are paying more taxes, or they are competing against another industry that could be just feeding by subsidies, so that could be not sustainable at the end, because subsidy, the money comes from the government, so come from the citizens. So the citizens are paying everything for that industry, and I think it's not sustainable. So it's good to incentive to start working in to give, as you mentioned, subsidies for the investigations to develop new ways to manufacture the goods that was manufactured before with fossil carbon. Now they need to change. They need more space, as you mentioned. They need new equipment. They need to optimize the procedures that currently are optimized for the fossil raw materials. So everything needs to change. So incentives are good, because the change, if not, could be even longer, but not. I hear. I think that in the three boxes, subsidy, and subsidy. I think that's not the real solution. That's maybe we don't have other ways to give money and to start with the innovation in these fields. But the first, I don't remember who was that the market must pull, and the industries must see that is a possible benefit there, that some customers are willing to pay a little bit more for this green product, let's call, and that's the perfect way. If not, okay, subsidies must help, but will be not the solution, because at the end, the price of the product will be increased too high if there is not a necessity of investment to optimize procedures. That's the point, I guess.
Maybe I can make a comment on the market pool, because that's one of the aspects that at CEFIC we have been working on. And so first of all, I think it's good to distinguish between, let's say, what is an innovation grant, like what can be used for scaling up an installation, like under circular bio-based joint undertaking or equivalent. So that is something that is necessary to scale up a technology and help that it becomes actually industrially viable. But indeed, so once that is the case, what we would like to see is more market pull measures that just help create a market for those type of products. So not really, let's say, subsidies as it is, for example, in the energy sector or renewable energy, in which there is really a subsidy. The other aspect that we would like to see is to actually have a level playing field with different uses of biomass. So there is now a pool in renewable energy directive for use of biomass for fuels, for example. And there is nothing similar for biomass use for chemicals. So we just would like to see a level playing field in a similar way to like energy uses, so that then companies have the possibility to choose where they want to direct the biomass instead of having it already kind of set because there is a pool on one side, but there is nothing on the other side.
Yes, maybe one comment on the last idea. I think we very much agree to this, that we do not only can consider this sector in isolation from other sectors like the energy sector. And we also need to talk about the policies for the energy sector and all the subsidies, whether to reduce them. We focused here in these policies on the chemical sector because it's already very much complicated, but what you just mentioned will or should definitely also play a role, and we will definitely consider and mention this in our deliverables and the final recommendations, so that you have really to create this level playing field across all of the sectors and cannot talk about only just one single sector alone.
Yeah, and if I may add another thing, so when I referred in the presentation about the cascading and the highest biomass use, so the way we actually intend it is to look as much as possible at integrating different value chains in a similar way in which it is done now in the chemical and petrochemical sector. So when you look at the refinery, it's an integrated site. So from one input, you have multiple outputs, and then side streams are used in a lot of other companies. Let's say from one company goes to another and then is used in another company. And this also from a, let's say, efficiency of use, that, and also from an economic perspective, that helps a lot. So that increases a lot the efficiency of biomass use, as it is now when you look at crude oil, which is then refined, etc. So the efficiency of use is very high. So one issue is if you have biomass that is used just for one or just a few outputs, then it's also difficult that the process is efficient. So we would like to promote as much as possible the integration and the highest biomass use in that sense, which can also mean that there is still fuels that are produced from biomass, which is fine, as long as that is not the only use.
Points. Actually, one of the post-its that also is just striking my attention now is in the bottom right quadrant of the biomass GHG emissions fact sheet. So basically, yeah, exactly there. So as you can see, we're distinguishing between two types of carbon taxes. One for the use of fossil feedstocks in chemical production and the other for low-value biomass uses. And then someone posted here as a weakness that additional taxes will increase the final product price and people will stop buying it and reducing the life quality. So I was wondering who posted this and to which of these policy options do you think it applies, or maybe to both? Could you explain a bit on that, just out of curiosity? Also, since this quadrant is quite empty still, I'm also interested to hear if anyone else does see any potential strengths of introducing a carbon tax in any form or shape. So if anyone would like to comment on that or post anything additional, then definitely encourage that.
I see that someone is now commenting exactly here. Maybe in the meantime, since there are like 10 minutes left, we can also open the last part of the Miro so people can continue working here. And if someone wants to contribute also here, we are collecting other policy options. As Harry said, we made this literature research, so the methodology was already explained. And here you find some of the policy options that we considered but were not selected and presented to you today. But if you have other policy options that better can respond to your needs, we invite you to add them in this part of the board, which is basically below the other two. You can use you have the post-its on the right side. You can, again, continue working on strengths and weaknesses in the two fact sheets, or either if you have other policies, since there were some criticism to some of our options, feel free to add them here so that we can take them into consideration.
This request was heard, and that someone immediately added a comment on the carbon taxes. So it seems that this is a recommendation. So the carbon border adjustment mechanism for chemical industry should help in creating an international global level playing field. Okay, this is something really interesting. So would someone like to elucidate on this point and why you think it would be helpful?
Yes, this was my addition as a recommendation, because I do agree that carbon tax would help in the transition, but like the orange comment says, it will also increase the price. And if there's no level playing field globally, then there's a high chance of consumers switching to the more cheap and less environmentally friendly options. So therefore, it should be important to have a carbon border adjustment mechanism to ensure the level playing field globally. Is my recommendation.
I would like to comment or actually ask on that point. Does today if I produce today a bio-based product, will I benefit from that compared to if I would produce the same product from a fossil source under EU ETS? Meaning, does the bio-based content help me somehow, or there's nothing right now in that sense? Because yeah, I would say no, right? Today it's.
Well, we haven't found any specific policy addressing that. You could say that in 2027, possibly the waste sector will be included into the second emission trading system, the EU ETS 2. So basically, when you have like, let's say a plastics product for now comes to waste, then you put you have to buy certificates on the emission trading system for this waste. So there is some kind of inclusion. The problem is that it addresses the very end of the value chain, and the producer of the plastic or the chemical, whatever, does not really has the incentive at the beginning, at the start of the value chain. So that's why it might be necessary to have this additional carbon tax that starts or addresses the beginning of the value chain. So I would say currently the emission trading system does not really address that.
Okay, so thanks.
So I see
maybe
that there
to
are also
jump.
some, yes, comments in the toxicity and circularity fact sheets that we considered less. I don't know if you want to
That's what
deepen
I
a bit
wanted
on this.
to highlight a little. We had a couple, and maybe we can go first to the bottom right on the pollution tax. There were two comments left, which are interesting. They are marked as weaknesses, and I think due to what they are explaining here, particularly they say that tracking the circularity and the toxicity reduction, it's a complex supply chain issue, and it might be also very costly. That's very true. And it can be difficult to face the monitoring part of circularity. That was also for us clear from the literature review, and for example, proposals of creating passports for specific chemicals or information that can be tracked for each one of the chemicals, so that when they mix with other ones, we can't foresee what are maybe unintended new chemicals from those combinations. And yeah, it is a challenging part, but it is also, well, a reality that this toxicity, it's impeding the circularity of these substances. So it's a little difficult. Then there was an example also left. It is also marked as weakness, but it was an example left, I think, from Washington, if I'm correct, regarding the Model Toxic Control Act. It says implement, I don't know where we were, on the bottom, right? Exactly. Implement on important chemicals as well as manufacturing in the EU as question mark. And I assume this comment is left from Saskia, but maybe not. In Washington, there is a Monitoring Control Act that might be an example. I think that's a valid question. Maybe we can check on it on our further analysis in this topic.
The color, I got confused about colors. I think I ended up just going to yellow because I have a lot more questions than answers, or I don't know enough about the policies here. But the
it's very valid.
In the end, a lot of times, and so this is where, I worked for state government, and a lot of the initiatives that we could do was funded by MOTCA, and it was tied to petroleum. But it's an example of a tax of certain chemistries, and so you might need to redefine, what the chemicals would be. But it could be one of many examples that might be of interest.
Thank you so much for the input. It's something that we didn't know before.
So I see that there are more or less 3 minutes left for this exercise. So I really invite people who wants to contribute, maybe also not writing in the Miro, but had some comments. They use so specific post-its or weaknesses or strengths you would like to comment. We really invite you to feel free to intervene.
Okay, to break the ice here, Martin from Braskem, I can make a comment on sustainability criteria. We believe it's fundamental to have those, right? There's no way to promote bio-based products without that, because bio per se doesn't mean sustainable. But we just ask for attention about overly prescriptive sustainability criteria, like we see in red, those annexes saying what can and cannot be used. I think it has to be really more based on, let's say, assessing the feedstock and its supply chain, and not being prescriptive, like having agricultural caps or caps on agricultural feedstock. Of course, we know very well the sustainability of our supply chain, and that needs to be reflected in the sustainability criteria that you need to have a very good traceability of your value chain. And I think the third-party certifications that were mentioned somewhere there, like ISCC, Bonsucro, RSP, etc., already do a great job in that sense. So yeah, so I think all in all, sustainability criteria is very necessary and welcome.
Martin, if I can jump into your remark, how do you see this? Because then what would happen is that the more unsustainable or less sustainable feedstock would go into biochemicals, and the very sustainable ones would go to biofuels, because that could be a reaction to what you propose.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is you can have palm oil that is totally unsustainable because it's linked to deforestation, but you can have palm oil grown in an agroforestry system that's helping recover degraded land that is sustainable. So why are we phasing out a very good feedstock just because there are bad practices out there? So yeah, I think in red there's something about iLook as well that maybe that, if done correctly, could be a way. But what I'm saying is that we need more feedstock and not less. So red, the way it is today, in my view, is very restrictive. I very much like the Article 29 where it says you cannot deforestate after 2008. It has to be, cannot come from high biodiversity biomes, etc. But not to the point where you say you cannot use corn. So there's some things in red I think don't apply. And don't forget, chemicals and materials are 10% of the volume of fuels, right? So we're talking about a lot less risk compared, and now we have incentives to fuels and we don't have to materials. So the first step would be to make sure we have the quotas in a at least similar level for both fuels and materials. Over time, maybe also, I think you will see, in line with the cascading principle, more and more fuels going to waste base and chemicals tapping into the available pool of feedstock that is now used for fuels. You know, if you know what I mean, I'm thinking here of ethanol and renewable diesel and so on.
Yeah, first generation, you mean? Yeah, yeah. No, but I think this is really a very valuable comment, because also in the red you see that there is less strict criteria in Annex 9 A and B for jet fuels. So there is already a distinction between the uses, and maybe we can indeed consider to make a recommendation to have, again, a different treatment of biomass going to chemicals there. Yeah.
Just the last comment, I want others also to speak, but maybe food should have the very basic sustainability criteria because it's the most necessary and the highest value for society. Materials, something in between, and fuels have to have the biggest, let's say, the most strict criteria, because the volumes of fuel is just so huge that then you start imposing risk to compete with other sectors in a way that is negative in the overall aspect. But I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Martin, for your insights. We all have a lot to say, but we have to, unfortunately, we have to end the meeting just to respect the schedule. But the good news is the Miro board will be open for another 1 week. So the upcoming days, if you think of any other alternative strengths, weaknesses, or solutions from your side, we will be more than happy to collect those ideas. And of course, I would like to invite you to the other sector workshops as well. We will have the textile sector workshop tomorrow, always at 10 o'clock. The plastics will be on the 5th of March. The construction will be on the 6th of March. So if you are interested in also insights from the other sectors, you are more than welcome. The same registration link applies to all. And after this activity, we will have the survey in order to understand which would be the option that you would prefer. So after this activity, we will collect all the insights, all the inputs in order to create a kind of questionnaire. We will also share it with you. So we also like to engage you in that activity. So I'm just checking very quickly if I missed anything for the time being to conclude. Yes, here is the registration link and the link to Miro. Of course, feel free to write to us if you have any other comments, suggestions, or if you want to be further engaged in the activities. We thank you very much from all consortium members. It was a very fruitful activity for us. Hope to see you again in our upcoming activities. Have a nice day ahead.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.